The wind howled across the barren plains of Illyria 7, carrying dust and grit that stung the eyes and painted every surface in shades of rust and gold. The twin suns hung low, casting long shadows over the scrapyard world. Callan Voss wiped the sweat from his brow as he tightened the last bolt on a broken-down cargo lifter. His hands were rough, stained with oil and dust, and his jumpsuit had more patches than original fabric. Illyria wasn't the kind of place anyone chose to live. It was where people ended up when they had nowhere else to go. Callan had learned to keep his head down, fix what he could, and avoid trouble. But that day, something unusual caught his eye. A trail of smoke curled into the sky from beyond the dunes, far past the junk heaps. It wasn't the normal kind of smoke from a burning trash pile or a faulty fuel cell. This was dark, steady, and rising from somewhere distant and dangerous. Most people would have ignored it. On this planet, strange things were best left alone. But something about it gnawed at Callan's gut. He had seen enough wrecks to know the difference between a crash and a cover-up, and this looked like someone needed help. Against better judgment, he grabbed his old field pack, loaded a pulse pistol just in case, and set off across the scorching sands. Hours passed, and the storm started to creep in, one of those slow, silent tempests that swallowed the sky before anyone realized. Sand hissed against his boots as he climbed the final ridge and looked down. There it was, a small transport shuttle half buried in the sand. Its wings were cracked, the hull scorched, and the emergency beacon was strangely silent. No active distress signal. That was odd. He made his way down carefully, eyes scanning for movement, fingers near his weapon. At first it seemed empty, like everyone had either escaped or perished. Then he heard a faint, muffled sound from inside the wreckage. A soft cough, followed by a whisper that didn't quite carry. He pried open the emergency hatch, and inside, huddled against the wall, was a woman. She was bruised, her face covered in dust, her clothes torn, and clearly not meant for survival. But there was a calmness in her eyes that didn't match the chaos around her. Callan stepped in slowly, not wanting to startle her. "You're all right?" he asked. She nodded weakly. I think so. My ship. It crashed. Coms were jammed. I lost contact with my escort." Her voice was dry, her words cautious. "Offer a name?" And when Callan asked, she just said, "Rin?" It didn't sound real, but he didn't press. He knew what it meant when people didn't want to be known. Without thinking twice, he helped her out of the wreck, offered her water, and told her she could rest at his workshop until help arrived. She looked at him strangely, as if she didn't understand why he was being kind. He didn't blame her. Illyria 7 wasn't known for kindness. Still, he couldn't leave someone to die alone in the storm. As they made their way back, the wind picked up and the desert began to howl. The walk was slow, and the woman stumbled more than once, but Callan stayed by her side. Something about her felt different, not just her clothes, but the way she spoke, the way she carried herself even. When injured, she wasn't from around here, maybe not even from this sector. But Callan didn't ask questions. Everyone had secrets, and not all of them needed answers right away. Back at the workshop, he set up a cot in the back room and gave her a blanket and some warm synth soup. She ate in silence, her eyes watching him the entire time. She asked if he always helped strangers like this. Callan just shrugged and said, "Someone's gotta." She didn't smile, but something in her posture relaxed, as if she hadn't expected decency in a place like this. What Callan didn't know, what she didn't tell him, was that she was Lyra Atheon. It's the wealthiest woman in the galaxy and air. 2 Atheon Industries, a trade empire that spanned 5 star systems. She had been traveling under a false identity, inspecting operations in secret when her shuttle was sabotaged. Someone had wanted her dead. Now, stranded and stripped of all protections, she had no choice but to rely on a man who didn't know who she was, and treated her like a person instead of a name. As the sandstorm thundered outside, Callan fell asleep in the corner chair, just in case trouble came knocking. Meanwhile, Lyra lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why a man with so little had chosen to give so much, and what it would mean if the people chasing her found her before she could return to her world. because if they did, it wouldn't just be her life at risk, it might be his 2 days, passed under the harsh suns of Illyria 7, as Callan and the woman he still only knew as Rin worked side by side to repair the damaged shuttle. The old workshop, filled with tools, spare parts, and forgotten machines, became a quiet refuge against the ever-present sandstorms outside. Callan noticed things about her that didn't fit the usual patterns of the people who passed through this forgotten corner of the galaxy. She spoke carefully, sometimes slipping words that hinted at education beyond the dusty streets and rusty machinery surrounding them. Terms like logistics protocol and asset reallocation came naturally from her lips, as if she belonged to a world far removed from scavenging parts and fixing engines. Yet, she seemed surprised every time Callan offered her food, clean water, or simple kindness. To her, the world was supposed to be about power, status, and cold calculations, not the quiet generosity of a man who had little but gave freely. Their conversations were brief but meaningful, wrapped in layers of unspoken questions and cautious trust. She never told him who she really was, and Callan never pressed. It felt safer that way. Still, the more they worked, the more Callan sensed that Rin was running from something far worse than the storm outside. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread across Illyria 7's scattered settlements. A high-profile crash had been reported on the fringe world, drawing curious eyes and dangerous ones. Travelers, traders, and even mercenaries talked in hushed tones at the dusty tavern where Callan often drank his bitter synth coffee. Rumors of a missing heiress from one of the galaxy's richest families filtered through the grapevine. Though no one spoke her name aloud, it was as if fear and respect hung over the subject like a heavy cloud. Strange figures appeared in the shadows near Callan's workshop, cloaked strangers who asked questions that didn't belong in this quiet place. They watched from a distance, always calculating, always waiting. Lyra, hidden behind her disguise, felt the weight of her absence grow heavier by the hour. Her disappearance was not just a personal crisis, it was part of a larger scheme to silence the truth behind a deadly corporate sabotage that threatened to shake her empire. Those responsible wanted her gone, not just out of sight, but erased. She knew she couldn't rely on her usual resources here, and she had to trust Callan more than she ever imagined. But trust was a fragile thing when lives were at stake. One evening, the tension broke when a small group of local thugs, drawn by the scent of money and power, confronted them outside the workshop. The men were rough and quick to threaten, their eyes cold with suspicion and greed. "Who's this fancy lady hiding in your place, Callan? You sure you want trouble?" one growled. Callan stepped forward, calm but firm, refusing to back down. He didn't know exactly why he was protecting her, maybe because no one should be hunted down like an animal. Or maybe because, despite everything, Rin deserved better than this world had offered so far. "She's with me. You step any closer, and you'll regret it," he said, his voice steady as he reached for a wrench at his side. The thugs hesitated, unsure if the quiet mechanic was bluffing. Yes. In that moment, something shifted between Callan and Rin. Her eyes met his, a flicker of surprise and something else, gratitude mixed with suspicion. Why would this man who had nothing risk so much for a stranger? Was there more to him than met the eye? Questions hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, as the thugs slunk away into the shadows. The quiet of the night returned, but the danger did not. Lyra felt the fragile safety of her disguise slipping away. She began to understand that Callan's simple acts of kindness were far from ordinary. They were a lifeline in a galaxy ruled by wealth and power, where people like her were either pawns or players in a game she had once controlled, but now barely understood. She wondered if this man from Illyria 7 was more than just a mechanic, maybe. He was a symbol of something she had long forgotten: genuine human kindness, courage without status, and the strength to stand for what is right even when the odds are against you. And Callan, for his part, was beginning to realize that beneath the mystery and fear lay a woman desperate not for wealth or power, but for trust and protection. In this harsh, unforgiving corner of space, two strangers, one running from a dark past The other, fighting for a quiet future, were bound by a fragile thread of hope that neither fully understood yet. The sun had barely begun to set when Callan wiped the sweat from his brow, stepping back to look at the shuttle that was slowly coming back to life under their hands. The damage was nearly fixed enough to get it off Illyria 7 and into safer territory. The air inside the workshop had changed. Lyra, still going by Rin, sat quietly by the window, her gaze distant and tired. The walls that held her secrets were finally starting to crumble. She looked at Callan, knowing she could no longer hide the truth that weighed heavy on her chest. Taking a deep breath, she spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not who I said I was," she admitted, her eyes searching his face for any sign of judgment or fear. "My real name is Lyra Athion. I'm the heiress to one of the largest trade empires in the galaxy. Someone wants me dead, to silence me forever." Callan listened without surprise or shock. Didn't ask for proof, didn't press for details. Instead, he reached out with the simplest offer of all. "You don't owe me your life story. Just tell me where you need to go, and I'll get you there." In that moment, their bond deepened, not with grand promises or words, but with the quiet understanding that sometimes trust was the most powerful weapon. Lyra began to see Callan in a new light, not as a poor mechanic scraping by on a forgotten planet, but as a man with quiet strength and kindness she had never expected to find. He treated her not like a prize or a threat, but like a human being. That simple truth was a revelation. The life she had known, filled with deals and betrayals, suddenly felt hollow next to the honesty she found in Illyria 7's dusty workshop. It was strange, almost foreign, to see humanity not as a battlefield, but as a source of hope. Still, danger was closing in. Lyra activated a small, hidden device, a transmitter, that sent a discreet ping to an ally she trusted beyond the stars. It was a call for help, silent but urgent. What she didn't realize was that the signal would also alert those who hunted her, those who wished to keep her story buried forever. The night grew darker, and shadows crept closer to the workshop's walls. The peaceful silence was shattered when a group of mercenaries, armed and deadly, arrived under the cover of darkness. Their footsteps were heavy, their intentions clear. Callan didn't hesitate. Years before, long before Illyria 7, he had fought in a war no one spoke about. He had buried that part of his life deep beneath layers of rust and routine. But now, with the threat at their doorstep, he reached for his old combat gear, battered but reliable armor suit. A pulse rifle and a combat blade, things he thought he'd never need again. The transformation was quick. The quiet mechanic became a fierce protector. Lyra watched, stunned, as Callan moved with precision and confidence. His every action showed that he was more than just a man who fixed machines. He was a warrior shaped by experience and loss, a shield willing to stand between her and death. The mercenaries forced the workshop doors open, weapons drawn, but Callan was ready. Bullets tore through metal and dust, but his quick reflexes and knowledge of the cramped space gave him the advantage. He used every tool, every corner, and every moment to hold the attackers back. Lyra stayed low, her heart pounding, but she could see a strength in Callan that made her believe they might just survive this night. She realized that the man she had helped had become her guardian in a world that suddenly felt much darker. As the fight continued, Callan's face remained calm, focused, unyielding. His determination was a beacon in the storm. The mercenaries, frustrated by his skill, tried to regroup and find another way in. But the old mechanic's knowledge of Illyria 7's terrain and his own workshop gave him the upper hand. Eventually, reinforcements from Lyra's ally arrived, a squad of elite security forces who quickly overwhelmed the attackers. When the dust settled, Callan stood tall, breathing hard but victorious. Lyra approached him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude, surprise, and something new, respect. She knew now that beneath the simple surface of this man was a depth of courage and loyalty she had never seen before. The masks they both wore had slipped away, revealing two souls connected by fate and the harsh realities of survival. That night, under the pale light of distant stars, they both understood that their journey was just beginning. The galaxy was watching. and neither of them would ever be the same again. The night air was thick with tension as Callan and Lyra fled the ruins of the workshop, the sound of their pursuers echoing behind them across the endless wastelands of Elira 7. Their footsteps crushed dry rocks and scorched earth, each breath sharp and urgent. The corporate assassins hunting Lyra were relentless, shadows blending with the darkness, closing in with cold precision and deadly intent. Lyra's heart raced as she struggled to stay ahead, her mind focused on survival and the hope that the emergency extraction she had secretly arranged would arrive before it was too late. Every step felt heavier as the truth of her identity weighed on them both, not just a hidden heiress anymore, but a target for the most powerful forces in the galaxy. Suddenly, a piercing light cut through the darkness from above. A sleek, armored extraction ship descended with a hum that shook the ground. Callan shielded his eyes, stunned, as the ship's systems scanned the area, locking onto Lyra's biometric signature with sharp precision. A fleet of small drones burst from the ship's belly, hovering like a swarm of vigilant guardians. The ship's hatch opened, elite guards clad in polished armor stepped out, saluting Lyra with reverence and addressing her as Lady Athean, a title that carried the weight of centuries of power and wealth. Callan stood rooted, watching in disbelief as the woman he had saved transformed before his eyes, not just in status, but in the world she belonged to. Yet despite the sudden change around them, Callan's voice remained steady and familiar. "You're still Rin to me. Fancy ships don't change that." His words carried the truth of their shared journey, a reminder that beneath the riches and danger, she was the same person who had trusted him when no one else would. Beyond what words could express, felt a new strength growing inside her, the strength to fight back against those who had tried to destroy her. Using her vast resources and influence, launched a sweeping investigation into the sabotage that had nearly ended her life, uncovering a tangled web of lies and greed reaching far beyond Elira 7. With Callan by her side, she ordered the exposure and dismantling of the shadowy network that had targeted her, determined to bring justice to those hiding behind wealth and corruption. The galaxy watched as a woman who had once been hunted became a force that could not be ignored. Her loyalty to Callan and the humanity he showed her becoming her greatest power. In the end, it was not the ships, the titles, or the money that saved her. Was the simple, unyielding strength of being human, standing firm in the face of darkness and refusing to be broken. Together, they faced a new dawn, ready to change the course of their worlds forever. Weeks had passed since the storm had settled on Elira 7, and life was slowly returning to its quiet, dusty rhythm. Callan Voss was back at his workbench, hands covered in grease and dirt, thinking the strange, dangerous chapter with the woman known only as Rinor, Lady Lyra Atheon, was finally closed. He believed their paths would never cross again. Elarosavan was a small, forgotten world, and she was a force in the galaxy. A woman with power beyond anything he had ever seen. Yet the memory of her kindness, her trust, and the fragile bond they shared lingered like a quiet flame. One afternoon, just as the suns dipped low and the sky painted itself in deep oranges and purples, a sleek cruiser descended near his modest workshop, disturbing the usual silence. Callan stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the sudden glare, to see Lyra step down not in royal robes or surrounded by an entourage, but in simple, practical gear that made her look like she belonged here, like she was one of them. Smile was warm but serious, a mix of purpose and a promise of something new. She didn't come with demands or expectations to repay some cosmic debt. Instead, she came with an offer that took Callan by surprise. "I want someone real on my advisory council," she said quietly, eyes steady on his. "Someone who tells the truth, even when it's hard. That someone is you." Callan hesitated. Politics, power struggles, and court intrigue were not his world, and he wasn't sure he was the man she thought he was. He declined the formal offer with a shake of his head, but he didn't refuse her friendship. To Callan, that was the most important gift of all, something genuine. A connection across the endless stars and different lives. Lyra nodded, understanding that this was a start, not an end. Then, with a quiet gesture that surprised him, she handed over a small datapad containing the deed to his workshop, but it wasn't just ownership, it was a promise. The shop was now fully funded, upgraded with galactic-grade technology, tools, and resources far beyond anything Elira 7 had ever seen. It was a way to say thank you, to give back in a way that no amount of money could truly explain. Callan watched her cruiser lift off, leaving behind a trail of shimmering light against the darkening sky, a smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope not for riches or fame, but for the simple truth that kindness and humanity, no matter how small or far apart, could change worlds. Lyra had come to Elira 7, a stranger running from shadows. But she left knowing that real strength came not from titles or empires, but from the bonds forged between people willing to stand for each other. And Callan, the mechanic who had nothing, now held a gift that went beyond wealth of friendship that would last across galaxies, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest power lies in being real, honest, and true.